There's an article today on CNN, and it's called Common Pesticides in Food Reducing Sperm Count Worldwide, study says. So, pesticides and its influence on human health, as you all know, I've been a human most of my entire life. And if it's influencing human well-being, I would like to know about it. So this topic came up, or I see this title come up, so I read the article. I'm going to read through it pretty quickly here, and then I'm going to use it as an example to explain a potential flaw in reasoning. So let's read through this real quick. Pesticides used in our home gardens and lawns are sprayed on food we eat, and sprayed on foods we eat are contributing to a dramatic decline in sperm count among men worldwide, according to a new analysis of studies over the last 50 years. Over the course of 50 years, sperm concentration has fallen about 50% around the world, said senior study author Melissa Perry, dean of the college. Oh, so she is the dean. I looked her up. I didn't realize this article actually identified her as the dean, but I thought she was the dean of at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia, and she is. So it says it right here in the article. So she's the dean. What is not known is the culprit, Perry said. While there are likely many more contributing causes, our study demonstrates a strong association between two common insecticides, organophosphates and N-methylcarbamates, and the decline of sperm concentration. I don't know if I need to read through the whole thing necessarily, but it basically the article talks about these particular pesticides being used in agriculture as well as in the building industry. It's used in a variety of different ways. And it talks about, you can read through it, it's on CNN right now, but it basically talks about the exposure of humans to pesticides, even in minute quantities, and the relationship between that and a human health, potential human health issue. In this case, talking about male sperm counts and it's a potential influence on fertility in men who want to have children. So I've already had my children, I'm done. But if my son is a male and I want him to be able to do that, have children, and if he wants to do that. So this interests me. If it's true, I want to know about it, right? And this is epistemology. I want to know, how do they know? My curiosity is, okay, I'm reading this. I don't see anything in here. Nothing I'm going to gain from a periodical like CNN is going to convince me one way or the other. To me, I'm much more curious and I don't know, resistant to just instant information. They say this, another doctor could come on and say something completely different. But they said it. It could be true. It could not be true. And I want to know about it. So I went to the article, which a lot of people may do. I suspect a lot of people won't do. But when you click on, it says a study published Wednesday on this link, a study published Wednesday in the Journal of Environmental Health Perspectives examined 25 studies around the world on the two chemicals and included 20 studies in the meta-analysis. Those studies looked at 42 different levels of impact among 1,774 men in 21 different study populations. Now, if you remember, the first guest I had was my wife, the dean, or the research dean here at UK for the College of Dentistry. And we talked about the hierarchy of evidence, and we differentiated how to prioritize information. And on that podcast, you can go back and look at it. She talked about the meta-analysis studies. So whenever we're talking about evidence doesn't start until we publish something. Anything prior to that is the equivalent of opinion. So once we publish it, it goes into the body of evidence. And then above that comes in cohort studies and multi-location studies, longitudinal studies, and you keep going up the pyramid until you get to robust review analysis and meta-analysis of the data. So in this case, this article says clearly 20 studies in the meta-analysis. So from what we've already learned on the channel, that when the word meta-analysis is used in the context of publications, we're talking about a serious publication. It's not something that I just did, with 20 or 30 patients in my lab, or 2 or 3 studies on my lawn or something. This is a fairly robust study. It should be. And so I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but what I did was I clicked on the link. Earlier today, this link didn't work. So I have not had a chance to read through this entire article with much critical thought, because I clicked on it, it didn't come up. I searched the authors, it didn't come up. I searched the title, I could not get it. I could not find it anywhere. And then about 20, 30 minutes before the show started tonight, I clicked on it and it popped up. So the article is online, and you can read it. It's called Adult Organophosphate and Carbamate Insecticide Exposure and Sperm Concentration, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis of the Epidemiological Evidence. So that's a really great title, and it's free. You can download it for free, and I did download it. And I'm going to briefly show you just a couple things. And so my position on this issue is completely neutral. I don't think it's true, and I don't think it's not true. It convinced me that I want to learn more about it, because I don't want my son to be exposed to any products or any sort of risk that might result in harm to his well-being or him as a human. So I'm interested in it. But just because they said it on CNN or just because they said it on a website doesn't make it true. Even if they published in this literature, it doesn't make it true, but it certainly I'd be more inclined to be convinced if I'm reading it in a published refereed paper based upon how it was written and what they said. Now, I've read it, have not read it, critically yet. I just, scanned through it. And I will say that it's fairly convincing. They did a pretty good job at explaining what they did and the weight of the evidence and the quality of the evidence, the quality of the papers they reviewed, their filtering out process of papers that did not meet their criteria for inclusion. They did a fairly good job of presenting the meta-analysis accurately from the best that I can tell. So I'm starting to lean a little bit towards, that might be accurate. There might be something here between the exposure to pesticides and this potential health problem in men. I'm not convinced by a long shot for me, but it certainly is, score one on the side of potential convincing of me. So it definitely, it's a good article is my point. It seems to be pretty solid. But I want to point out in the discussion of this is the abstract. In the discussion, I want to point out, I highlighted this one sentence, and this is not to detract from the value of the article or to demean it or I'm not trying to refute it at all. It's in their own article. It says right here, this comprehensive investigation found sufficient evidence of an association between higher organophosphates and what's NMC, I forget, probably whatever insecticide exposure, NMC insecticide exposure. N-methyl carbamate insecticide exposure and lower sperm count concentration in adults. Now that sentence is correctly written. This comprehensive investigation found sufficient evidence of an association between. Okay? There is an association clearly between the exposure to these two pesticides and a lower sperm count in men. Done. I will buy that. I know insecticides exist. I know sperm counts in men exist. And this paper shows there's a relationship between these two. It doesn't take much to convince me that that's possibly true at this point. Okay, there's a relationship there. I'm okay with that. Let's look at something else. Now, there's an article that was published in 2014 on this periodical called Deaths by Swimming Pool Drowning versus Nicolas Cage Films and Other Spurious Correlations. So this article brings in various other correlations. And I just want to read through a couple of these graphs that I'm showing on screen. For those listening, I'm looking at an article. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to show these graphs. And they're line graphs. And the first one has years on the x-axis and deaths on the y-axis. And one line says the number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets. And the next line says total revenue generated by skiing facilities. And these two lines almost exactly correlate with each other, meaning there's an extremely strong correlation between the total revenue generated by skiing facilities and the number of people who died in bed at night by getting tangled in their sheets. Okay, does one cause the other? Clearly not, but there's a correlation. Let's go look at the next one. This one is years on the x-axis again, and I don't know the y-axis, but it looks like money. And money on one y-axis and deaths on the other. The U.S. spending on science, space, and technology is one line, and the line's going up over the years. And the next line is suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation. And they're literally almost identically correlated, meaning the correlation is probably 0.999 or something. So, and by these data, we shouldn't spend any money on science, space, and technology because there's a correlation between that and suicides by hanging, strangulation, and suffocation. Clearly, these two are unrelated, but there is a correlation. Okay. Let's go down to one of my favorite ones, because I'm not a Nicolas Cage fan of his movies, but I am a fan of Nicolas Cage as a connoisseur of music. This one has deaths on the y-axis and years on the x-axis, and the one line says the number of people who drowned by falling into swimming pools over the years. And the next line is the number of films Nicolas Cage appeared in. And there's a very good correlation between these two. There's also a very good correlation between the times of the year that people eat ice cream and the times of the year that people die in drowning in swim pools. Is there a cause there? Clearly, there's no cause there. It just so happens that people tend to eat ice cream in the summertime, and people tend to go swim in swim pools in the summertime. Okay, so I'm saying all that just to say this. I'm not saying that this particular article on CNN is being dubious at all. I'm not saying, but I'm also not saying that pesticides cause infertility or low sperm count in men. I'm not saying that, and neither are the authors. The authors of the article aren't saying that either. They're saying there's a relationship. There's clearly a documented relationship, and you can go search this in the literature on the medical literature, and there you'll find dozens of, well, maybe not dozens, but you'll find many papers on that same topic of the relationship between pesticide exposures in either their career or however they were exposed to it over the years by eating or versus not eating foods that were grown under pesticide usage, and infertility or low sperm count or some other health related issue. You'll find those correlations. And there very well may be a cause related there. Maybe a source or a reason, there may be indeed pesticides are causing that. That might be true. But I wanted to point that out when we're reading things and we're seeing things in turfgrass literature, when you see a marketing sheet or you see, someone give a presentation or whatever the case might be, and it says, perfect example is our article that we did on water use in the golf course or nutrient use in the golf course. We had a correlation between people who take soil samples and people applying more nutrients. There's an association there, but on a podcast with, I think it was on the Grass Factor podcast last year sometime, I made it clear that we're not saying that soil sampling causes the application of more nutrients, although a case could be made that that's true. But we weren't saying that. We're just simply saying there's a relationship between these two that needs further investigation. And so when you see these things on the news, pesticides are associated with this or with that, well, do a little bit of work before you're convinced. Click on the link, read the article, see if it's a good article, see if it's a validly written and refereed article first. And if it is, okay, well, there's a little evidence there. Potentially there's a relationship there. But understand that correlation doesn't equal causation. So don't be easily convinced by simply seeing something that must make sense. Applying nitrogen results in applying nitrogen is directly correlated to some increase in microflora in an estuary somewhere. Well, that makes sense because nitrogen and phosphorus can cause that. But it can, but just because there's a relationship there doesn't mean that that's the cause from turfgrass fertilizer, right? This is what's been going on in Florida for decades, where the elected officials and environmentalists want to make a relation, want to tie a connection between the application of nutrients to fertilizer and these increases in microflora and macroflora in our water bodies. Meanwhile, the evidence coming out now seems like it's actually pointing more towards septic systems, potentially being the source or the major source of these issues, right? But the correlation, people wanted to correlate it back then. It kind of starts to get into our vernacular, starts to kind of get into our mind. Oh, there's clearly a relationship there. And so clearly there's a cause there. Well, hold on. We got to think through this critically. This is epistemology. How do we know that? We don't know that, right? The way in which we become convinced one way or the other is to review the refereed literature, not some marketing sheet on an environmentalist website somewhere. Or the reverse could be true. A marketing sheet on a a manufacturer or distributor's website about some product. I mean, I'm not saying environmentalists are bad. I mean, I consider myself an environmentalist, but at the same time, you know, we got to look at, you know, the evidence, not just what's presented in a periodical as evidence. Or they're trying to convince you of something. Don't be convinced until you see a little bit more evidence, and that comes from refereed papers in most cases.